On the next episode of Painting and Travel, Sarah talks to some owners of antique autos, while Roger puts the finishing touches on a car once owned by silent film star Fatty Arbuckle.
On our last episode of Painting and Travel, Sarah and I visited the Concours d'Elegance in Amelia Island, Florida. Fantastic car show. It was there we saw this fabulous automobile owned by Jack Nethercutt, who also owns a fabulous museum in Selmar, California. This car once belonged to Fatty Arbuckle, the famous silent screen actor. It was important that I get all these big shapes in, but now they're all in place. What I need to do is take each section and just work on the detail piece by piece. The colors I have out on my palette today are white, ultramarine blue, cerulean blue, purple, alizarin crimson, naphthol red, cadmium red light, and Indian yellow. So basically I'm working with just the primary colors in basic shades. Well, I think I'll start by putting some finishing touches on these headlights. I'm mixing up cerulean blue and white, and I'm going to put some highlights right on the top of this light. Normally anything like this would reflect a warm tone from the sun, but since this is chrome, it's reflecting the sky, so I'm using the cool colors to paint this. Put a touch of pure white right there where the sun is sparkling off that chrome. This circle right here is actually part of the glass right there. I'm using my computer monitor as a reference, so I've got some good photographs of the detail here. I'm going to spray that lightly with some water, just so when I put these lines out here, the paint will flow slightly and give me a softer edge than it would had I not sprayed that. And if they're still too hard, I can spray it again, and that paint will just flow out just slightly. If it's still too hard an edge, I can take a dry brush and just go over that, soften those edges. I have to do that before it dries, but it dries very quickly. I'm using my ruler here as a guide. Now just put my finger up here on the ruler, just put one or two fingers on the side of the ruler, and I can hold my brush in these two fingers, let my other finger slide down so I can get a straight line. There are a few darker colors inside this headlight, so I'll mix up some colors with my blue and red and yellow just to make a dark tone. There's a few spots of just dark tone right in here. I'm just applying this with a very light touch. Now I'll move over and do the headlight on the left. And once again, I'll take some pure white, put these highlights in. I'm going to put them approximately in the same position as I did over here. It's sort of an angle that goes like this. So I'll keep that position about equal. Well, I'm going to work on the grill next. I've got the radiator, this dark part is the radiator. I've got that in there. Now it's time to put that chrome grill work over it. Again, I'll mix some cerulean blue and white. I think I'll just stay with that color for now. I won't mix a third color in it, just the cerulean blue and white. Well, this is always a bit tricky here. What I need to do is, I think just for my own benefit, is strike some horizontal and vertical lines across this area. That way it can give me a bit of a guide. So when I start putting the lines across there with my brush, I can have a a guide every once in a while so I don't start to curve them one way or the other, to keep them all horizontal and vertical. I just have a pastel pencil here, and with my T-square, I don't have to strike in every line, but just here and there, just to be sure I'm on track. Keep these all horizontal. Okay, back with the cerulean blue and white. Now I'll start on the right-hand side and work this way. That way I won't get my hands into my wet paint. Here I'm coming up to my first guideline right here that's very faint, but I can see it, and that way I know I'm doing these vertically, not curving them off one direction or another. I'm not sure if I have a astigmatism or not, but occasionally I look at a painting and I will notice that some of my buildings or something are tipped slightly, and I certainly don't want anything tipped crooked on this radiator grill. What I need to do to get this line down here and drag it all the way is first of all, I need a good brush, not an old beat up brush. I need one that has a nice point to it. It's got some good spring to it. And the important thing is to load the brush up with paint. It has to be fairly loose, the paint. Can't be very stiff. A lot of paint on the brush so it flows off the end of the tip of the brush nicely. I had to do this same procedure with this large painting right in back of me of the Anklo Key Lighthouse. There was a fence there that had a wire mesh on it. So this is basically the same thing here. Now, over on this side of the radiator, this headlight is casting a shadow across the grill. So this chrome work is a bit darker, but I think I'm going to make it all the same color to start with, and then probably I'll put a glaze over the darker areas to put that in shadow. I think that might be the easiest solution. If I put enough paint on my brush, I can probably do 2 of these lines without even filling my brush up again. Might even do a 3rd one. Well, I've got all the vertical lines in, now I'll do the horizontal lines. But as I was doing the vertical lines, some of the pastel pencil rubbed off. So I'm going to give myself a few more lines in here, redo these. That way I'm sure not to get them crooked. There we go. Load my brush up. Take my ruler, and I'll just continue on working down. It's a bit repetitive, but it doesn't take that long to make these lines. This is just to get the basic grid work down for this. Once I get this in, then I'll need to go back and carefully on each one of these make it look like we have that basket weave. Getting down close to finishing this grid. Now that I've got this grill laid out, I need to make it look like it has that basket weave to it. So I can do that by putting in some highlights, but before I do that, I think I'm going to put this shadow in with some cool colors. That was created by this headlight casting its shadow over here. I'll spray that. See, it goes right across here. This is one of the nice advantages of acrylics. This is already dry, just a matter of a minute or 2. Totally dry. This is a thin wash of paint, thin wash of color. Here, by putting that on as a wash, that grill work still shows through. Now I'll even that out and soften this edge right here. This edge up here will be harder edge as it comes down. It gets softer as it gets further away from the headlight. Well, I've got this color out. I'm going to cast a shadow right up here, right under the grill. There, now while that's drying, I can start to add the highlights. Again, I'm going to use primarily white for this. And what I seem to end up with here is one of these going over, the other one going under. Now I'm going to come down to the next level here and just keep adding these. It seems like this might be a bit tedious, but really the results are a lot of fun, so it's certainly worth the effort. Now, even with a good photograph, it's hard to tell what's what in something like this. That's why it always pays to work on location if possible. Of course, something like this, it's pretty difficult. So the next best thing, of course, is a photograph, but I'm sure if I were there looking at this car in person, I would probably get a whole different take on it. It would probably appear totally different than it does in the photograph. But when that's all I have to work with, and that's what has to be done. I'm going to vary my highlight color here, my accent color. This is basically the cerulean blue and white, but occasionally I'm going to pick up more white than I am cerulean blue and just grab some more highlights through the area where the sun might just be sparkling a little bit more on one area than another area. This is essential that I put in these highlights just so it doesn't look like a bunch of square grid marks on here. I might be able to leave some of these just as they are, but I think I'm going to touch every one of them just slightly. And I'm discovering as I go along here that this pattern can vary slightly and still look fairly accurate. Right down in the shadow area of this grill, I need to add some highlights as well, but they won't be nearly as pronounced as the ones up in this area. All the horizontal and vertical lines I put on there to begin with were very straight, but this grill work I want to feel a little more organic. But by adding the highlights as I'm doing now, it'll break up that harshness of those vertical and horizontal strokes. Well, I think my next step is to put the details on this license plate. I had sketched it in earlier, but as I painted this blue, I lost all my lettering on there. So once again, I'm going to take my pastel pencil and my ruler and just lay this out. An easy way to make a horizontal line, if you have a flat surface like I do here on this easel, is to hold my hand on the bottom of the easel, just pinch my fingers like this, and I can run my hand along this. On the top I can have my pastel pencil, and I can easily make a nice horizontal line quite easily. Let me see, so I'll find the center of this license plate. It's 6 inches. We'll mark the 3 inches here. We have the word fatty, F-A-T-T-Y, so the middle letter will be T. So we'll put the middle letter T in there. Put another T here. This way I can be sure it comes out even on both sides. And just to be sure, I can also measure from this side to here. It's approximately 1 inch. I'll measure there, put the F, and that comes out pretty good. California, I'll do the same thing, except I won't measure each letter here. I think I'll start by putting the border around this license plate, and I'm going to mix up some cerulean blue and white. Make a straight line right across the top of the license plate. And as I did with the radiator grill, I loaded my brush up with quite a bit of paint so it flows off the brush, and I can do this with just 1 or 2 strokes. On the sides here, it's not catching quite as much light, so I've mixed up some blue that's slightly darker. I'll put a bit of red in that because it might be catching some of the reflection from these fenders. So that's kind of a purple color. There now, I'll just round these corners with some darker blue. I'll put a shadow right under here. Now for the lettering, it's a kind of a bright yellow color, so I'm going to take my Indian yellow and white. My Indian yellow is transparent, which means if I put that on there without any white in it, this blue would just show right through it. So I'm mixing some white with it. It is light, and this will make it opaque. And I'll use my lines here that I made with my pastel pencil as a guide. These letters are rounded somewhat because they're, of course, stamped out. So I looked at my photograph. That yellow wasn't quite right, so I've added a bit of red to that. Now I'm ready to put California in here. Now, since these are raised letters, I want to put a highlight and a shadow on them. I'm going to spray that with some water just so I can wipe my pastel pencil off. Just put a darker shadow right on this side. It won't show up very much, but it will show up enough to give this a little bit of sense of depth here. Now I'll put that shadow on these smaller letters that say California. It's kind of subtle, but these little details will add a lot to the finished painting, I think. Now I'll take some pure white, maybe add a touch of yellow to it, not very much. And I'll put the highlight on the top of these letters. So we'll just use pure white right on top here to highlight these letters to show where they're raised. Here, I'm not going to do all of the highlights on these letters. I think I'm just going to touch the top of them. Just going to put in one or two highlights right on the edge of these letters. Just some accents where that sunlight might be sparkling off that letter. I do have a bar here that goes between the two lights, and I'll put that in, but I think that pretty much does it for the license plate. The Radiator Ornament, it's very unusual. It's a man atlas or somebody holding a globe. So it's not very distinct in my photograph, so I'm just going to have to suggest it the best I can. I'm going to mix up kind of a neutral, cool color there. Just place it in here with one solid color to begin with. I can, once I place it in there, then I can add the highlights, the lighter areas, and the darker areas, but I'll have my middle tone expressed already. It's not very descriptive. In fact, the ornament itself is very soft. It doesn't have a lot of hard detail in it. It's quite impressive, though. Well, cerulean blue and white. Once again, will give me the highlight on the top of this globe. And I'm adding a bit of yellow right here to the top of these lights. It kind of ties it together with this yellow on the license plate. Well, we have two rear view mirrors, one mounted on each fender, and I've taken my pastel pencil once again, and I've sharpened up the details so I have a little more to go by there. And of course, I'm using my photograph as a reference. I don't think I have too much to do to these, but I will start. I've got my middle tones. I'm going to mix up some blue, and I think I'll put some red in that because these dark areas right under here are going to be reflecting the fender. Yeah, I can see where this this reddish color is reflecting the fender, so this is a good idea to make this kind of warm in here. On the top side, it will be cooler because it's, again, reflecting the sky. And that adds some nice color to the piece, too. To have this warm color and the cool color above it. I'm going to put a touch more red right in the bottom here where this is going to catch the light from that fender. So we got this purple color, and then we'll really go to a dark red down there. Well, a few more accents to this, and that rear view mirror will be finished. Then I'll move to the one over here on the right, do the same thing. Well, I need to get down a little bit lower here to do this. I'm going to mix up sort of a gray color with my three primary colors of yellow, blue, and red. Make sort of a Z pattern in here and follow my lines that I just put on there with the pastel pencil. I think I want some of the highlights in here, so I'll take my same gray color and I'll put some more white with it. And just up in this area, I'll go over these one more time with the lighter value. Well, I think this might be getting close to being finished. Some reflections on these fenders might do the trick. I'm going to spray this fender because I want my paints to flow on here very softly. And I'm going to start by putting on some lighter colors. Up here, I'm going to get a lot of reflection from the sky, but I'm going to put the reds in first. I'll put the paint on there, I'll wipe my brush off so I'll have a dry brush. And since this is wet, I'll just blend these colors. Blend the wet colors into the dry colors. Right down towards the bottom, we have a darker color, so I'll take my alizarin crimson, cerulean blue. Again, I'll give it a little spray. We'll make that darker. Put in a dark patch of color. Wipe my brush off. I can just flow those wet colors right up and over and into those dry colors. Makes it look just like if they're two wet colors being blended together. Right at the top of the fender, we have the sky being reflected right off the top of this fender, right up in here. I'm going to make that quite light. Cerulean blue, white, maybe a touch of ultramarine blue. Again, I'll spray it right in here. It's where that fender is catching the light from the sky. And then it goes right down here. Wipe my brush off, and I'll just soften that edge. Now I'm going to mix a warm color with my Indian yellow and white because the sun is reflecting off that fender right here. I'll wipe my brush off and I'll just start blending that. Now keep in mind, this is dry. This paint right here is totally dry. With the use of my atomizer and sprayer, getting this a little bit wet, it looks like these two colors are wet and I'm blending them together. Right on the edge of the fender, I'm going to take my small pointed brush and I'm going to put a highlight right on the edge of this fender where it's catching the sunlight. Going to lose the edge of this fender up here, sort of push it in the background. Now I'll just add a few more touches to this fender here on the right, similar to what I did on the left, and we'll be finished. This was a fabulous automobile and fun to paint. I've been a fan of Fatty Arbuckle for many years, and I'm grateful that Jack Nethercutt allowed me to do this painting of the car from his collection. There were many other incredible automobiles at the Concours in Amelia Island, Florida. So this is a good time to show you a few more of those, and then we'll take one last look at this painting.
In restoration today, there are many really good shops that are trying to preserve originality, whether it's original paint, original upholstery, any bits of the car that are original. So you take a car like this, okay, it has been repainted and it has been reupholstered, but it was more than half of its lifetime ago. We found this car with our client maybe 4 years ago, and his father owned it and had it restored in about 1950. So that makes it almost 60 years that it's been around. We pulled it out. His father had been repainted one time and upholstered one time. We pulled it out of his storage barn, and we went about meticulously cleaning, scrubbing, preserving the paint. We realized that we could preserve the paint, preserve all the mechanics, every bit of the car that had been preserved once in its life has now been preserved again. In this particular instance, we worked very, very hard. He's been using the cars since. He's won several concours with it, and it's just one of those very rare 1911 Mercer raceabouts that has all of its original components.
Is that an example of one of your restorations?
Both of those, the black car and the blue car. We can go over there if you'd like.
I'd love to.
Okay, off we go.
In the 80s, to a friend of his, so it is. Sitting in a car, we went on and drove my dad's car. Well, this car was originally built in the mid-20s by a fellow by the name of Al Begnotti, whose brother was later famous for Indianapolis race cars and engines, George Begnotti, all of San Francisco. There it went to my dad, Louis Vermeil, in say 1937-ish, somewhere around there, and they ran it a little bit before the war, and then the war stopped all racing, and then after the war he got it going again. He started running it about 48 or 49, and then he ran this car until the engine got too small and underpowered to compete, and he set this one aside, I'd say 1952 or 3, and never ran it again. And then he started running some of his other cars that he got later with bigger engines. And when my father passed away in 1986, I asked the family if I could take old number 7 and set it aside, that someday I would restore it. And so someday it's come. It's finished. And that was a long time ago. So it's been in our family since the mid-30s.
So this car is really an old friend.
Yeah, it's part of our family.
Mm-hmm.
It's part of our family.
For more information about painting and travel with Roger and Sarah Bansemer, visit paintingandtravel.com.